Bryan Cahall.
Good evening, Chairman and honorable members. Everyone, I appreciate. My name is Bryan Cahall. I'm a poet and composer. I live in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and I'm a new member here, a voter in Mr. Brown's district. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I also appreciate the representatives' fidelity to rigorous inquiry, and I think we should hold each other to that whenever possible. I'm coming out in favor of this resolution. I've had to wrest my conscience from the grip of a certain quietism, a kind of voice that says in response, for example, to criticism of the Trump administration's immigration policy, that it was, in fact, President Obama who was the great deporter, that it was President Obama who deported 3 million or so people. It's a voice that says that this country has always been run by the ultra-wealthy and militaristic, and that has always been the affluent minority who've pulled the strings of power. That in fact this is just how the American system was designed. And so therefore Trumpism is merely a particularly vulgar manifestation of the status quo. It's a voice that says that at least since the Second World War, the fossil fuel industry has had disproportionate and overwhelming influence over our government and our society. And so that the fact that the man at the helm of the State Department is one whose conflicts of interest exceed even the President of the United States, a person who any reader would conclude would have more loyalty to his Mama Exxon than to the public, because he's never held a public post. Might have InfoWars did. It's a voice that said, in short, that these are ordinary times, and that what you're seeing now are changes of degree and not of quality. And things changed for me. Before I was drawn into this way of thinking because it felt grown up and, like I said, sensible. But I now believe that it was fear that led me to this way of thinking. Fear that these are, in fact, extraordinary times. Fear that the world is fundamentally different today. Fear that I may have to submit myself to harm in order to avoid an unthinkable fate for my country. Fear that patriotism is actually a duty, a good despite its pitfalls, that ideas must be embodied and realized, and that I, having a body and a conscience, am responsible. The fear that tyranny is not only possible, but is well nigh befalling us, Americans of all people. Now, it's often said, and often carelessly, that history repeats itself, but I think this is imprecise. I believe that while life, as Kierkegaard said, can only be understood backwards, it must be lived forwards. The resolution before you today is a declaration that we will live this life forward, that we shall not be constrained by purported laws of history, that the great and variant people are not doomed to be subjugated yet again by brutes and manipulators, by machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. Our history does not determine our future, but we must attend to it, or it will be weaponized against us. History does not repeat, writes the Yale historian Timothy Snyder, but it does instruct. As the Founding Fathers debated our Constitution, they took instruction from the history that they knew. Concerned that the democratic republic they envisioned would collapse, they contemplated the descent of ancient democracies into oligarchy and empire. As they knew, Aristotle warned that inequality brought instability, while Plato believed that demagogues exploited free speech to install themselves as tyrants. In founding a democratic republic upon law and establishing a system of checks and balances, the Founding Fathers sought to avoid the evil that they, like the ancient philosophers, called tyranny. They had in mind the usurpation of power by a single individual or group, or the circumvention of law by rulers for their own benefit. It is thus a primary American tradition to consider history when our political order seems imperiled. Unquote. The book I just quoted is it's called On Tyranny, Lessons from the 20th Century, and I urge you all to read it. It was written and published since the election. It's brief and divided into 20 lessons from tyrannies of the past 100 years. Lessons like, do not obey in advance, be kind to our language, and be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Throughout, Professor Snyder draws upon concrete history to derive these lessons. In the chapter titled Defend Institutions, he writes, "We tend to assume that institutions will automatically maintain themselves even against the most direct attacks. This was the very mistake that some German Jews made about Hitler and the Nazis after they formed a government. On February 2nd, 1933, so just a few days after Hitler became chancellor, a leading newspaper for German Jews published an editorial expressing this mislaid trust. Quote, "We do not subscribe to the view that Mr. Hitler and his friends, now finally in possession of the power that they have so long desired, will implement the proposals circulating in Nazi newspapers. They will not suddenly deprive German Jews of their constitutional rights, nor enclose them in ghettos, nor subject them to the jealous and murderous impulses of the mob. They cannot do so because a number of crucial factors hold those powers in check, and they clearly do not want to go down that road. When one acts as a European power, the whole atmosphere towards ethical reflection tends toward ethical reflection upon one's better self and away from revisiting one's earlier oppositional posture," unquote. Have you, distinguished assemblymen and women, heard language like this in the past few months? Have you spoken it yourselves? What this passage means to me is that we would be fools not to take this regime at its word. Better, I would be a fool, and you, as elected officials who've taken oaths, would be negligent. When Trump calls journalists the enemy of the people, he is invoking Joseph Stalin. When Bannon writes and Trump reads America First, he is invoking a pro-Nazi organization from almost 80 years ago. And when Bannon, who, let's face it, is the brains here, Trump is a carnival barker, charged with riling his base into a perpetual frenzy with rally after rally, and somehow under our noses. Ormond Bailey's did not, it turns out, actually close, it just moved on. And never underestimate the power of the big top.
Are we on the resolution?
Representative?
Are we on the resolution? Are we name calling?
And never underestimate the power of the big top. Just don't underestimate it. Point is that Bannon is the brains. And when he declares himself an economic nationalist, and that his primary agenda is, quote, deconstruction of the administrative state, we should take him at his word. But we don't need to, because it's happening before our very eyes. And all of this aside from any speculation about foreign powers like Russia and the material connections that people like Tillerson have with them, and he certainly does. You have choices to make. Don't repeat the failures of your counterparts in the last century. Don't obey in advance. Don't think that institutions will just defend themselves. Don't wait to act. Be a patriot. Patriotism isn't loyalty to an office or a person or one's own career, but to an ever-expanding and dynamic idea. Behold it, do it justice, defend this idea, act. Bone up on the history, start with Snyder's book, it's inexpensive and it's easy to find. Act. Put the resolution put to the floor to vote on it. Let the assembly vote. It would represent an act of good faith to those you serve. Tyranny begins its course by spreading doubt among fellows, or as Aeschylus put it, for somehow this is tyranny's disease, to trust no friends. You must see it happen. We who are vulnerable, and those who are much more vulnerable than I am, need to trust you as we would trust friends. Earn it, first by sending this resolution to the floor, and then by going out and meeting your people. Go to the halls, meet them where they are, see the lives that they lead, address them in spaces that make them more comfortable, even if it makes you less comfortable. Change your routines the way that so many are now being forced to change theirs simply to survive and to evade persecution. We live in a time of extreme and deepening inequality, a suicide and opioid epidemic that is ravaging the country, and imminent climate catastrophe. Go out of the halls and see what it's like. Schedule an open meeting in your district for this month. If you have scheduled one, schedule a second. Publicize it. It will do more than you think. If you act, you will have been courageous in your duty, remembered fondly and honored, even if we and democracy itself fail. If you do not act, you will not be merely forgotten, but repressed from memory, like a great trauma by the body politic. And just as in repression in an individual psyche, it would be at great cost to the body. I hope you make wise choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for the witness? Thank you, Brian.